Okay, so I'm making biscuits. I had my dry ingredients together already. I have about half a cup of butter, or half a stick of butter rather, which I think, no, half a cup of butter, sorry, which I had cubed up a little bit. It's a little bit soft, as you can see, because it had been sitting out. And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can use a pastry blender. I don't have one, so I'm not going to use one. You can use a fork. You just kind of press down and scoop, and press and scoop until you have all your fat broken up. Usually I would use shortening, but I don't have any, so we're not going to use that today. And as you can see, I actually typically use my hands. I do not have my assistant cinematographer here, so this is a little bit of an awkward view, but usually I would use both hands, which is completely not recommended, by the way, because the heat of your hands softens the butter. But I seem to have magic hands, or magic fingers, if you will. So that's typically what I do. And then you can see that the butter is getting smaller. You want it about, probably about this big, maybe a little bit smaller. They're not going to be even, of course, whether you're using a fork or a pastry blender or your hands or whatever. They will be a little bit rough. And then once you get that going, I'm going to pause this video so I can really get into my mixing here, and then I'll show you how they come together. Okay, so here's part two. I've mixed in my fat, and you can see it's a little bit rough. Here's a couple pieces. This one's a tiny bit big, but it's fine. Some of them are a little bit smaller. And so now that I've done that, I'm going to pour in my liquid, which in this case is milk. And then this is where you are going to mix it by hand. You don't want a stand mixer or a hand mixer, because that will overwork the dough and that will cause the gluten to form. And we don't want that for our biscuits because we want them to be fairly tender. And you really just want to mix until you just incorporate the liquid. And actually, I think I might need a little bit more. So but you can see how it's starting to come together. And it'll be a very rough, shaggy dough. So let me get some more liquid and I will return. Okay, so I did need a little bit more liquid. You can see now how it's starting to come together. And I'm going to set the phone down so I can have a little more mixing here. I don't actually know what you can see from there. Probably the side of the bowl, very exciting. And I have made this recipe a lot, so I don't always use exact measurements. Kind of the story of my life. And I'm just going to need a little more liquid. I'm using milk. You can use buttermilk, which is better, but of course we don't have any in the house. I did add a little bit of water just then, and that's fine too. So biscuits are pretty flexible, and you can hear them scraping together. Okay, good. So this is what it looks like when it comes together. So you can see it's just barely together. It's not overworked. It's still very rough. So I'm going to put some flour down. And I typically use King Arthur flour because I think it is better flour. But, you know, use what flour you have, all-purpose flour. And that's the tea we'll be having. So, I'll take this guy out. And again, I'm doing this one-handed, so it's not the, it's not exactly the Tarkovsky of baking videos. Okay. So I've got it out. I'm going to knead it just a little bit to pat it with flour. You can't tell, of course, from the video, but it is a little bit sticky. You can see that. So we want to add a little bit of flour just to help it come together just the way it should. And I'm just going to reach my hand right in the bag. Again, my hands are in fact clean. So that's about it. Now, you can roll your biscuits out with a rolling pin. I don't do that. I just pat them out by hand and get kind of an even thickness. Again, some people feel, and I'm included, that using the rolling pin kind of starts to activate the gluten and makes them a little bit tougher. So I just use my hands. And again, I've made this recipe often enough that I can just do it by feel. I don't know, maybe a 1/4 inch thick. I'm not really good with those kind of measurements. But not super thin, not necessarily super thick. Let's say about like this is pretty good. Maybe that's 1/4 to 1/2 inch, somewhere in between. So I'm gonna cut them out with my high-tech biscuit cutter here. There are round biscuit cutters. I just use glass because, you know, I've got those around all the time. And that's it. This one didn't come together quite, so I'm just going to squish it a little bit. And I will set it on the pan and so forth. So I'm going to stop that cat dinner. I am going to stop here, and momentarily we will have, through the magic of the internet, momentarily we will have complete biscuits. Okay, so I just took these guys out of the oven. There we go, look, all golden brown and nice. And I've got my butter, I've got my honey, and I'm going to break them open, apply butter and honey, and eat. So that's what they should look like. That's it. They should be nice and golden brown. Some people like them a little darker. I like them a little on the lighter side. Bon appetit.